jump into this topic headlong and see where it takes us. And this is what I've been asked. Is those who have narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, according to the DSM-5, those who've been diagnosed with NPD, are they always abusive? Is it possible to have a personality disorder from a cluster B group, particularly antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder, and not be abusive at the same time? And why do we call narcissistic abuse? Is that a fair diagnosis? Are we saying that every narcissist narcissistically abuses? Or maybe we've mislabeled the abuse. Why not just call narcissistic abuse abuse? Why designate it as something different from emotional abuse or psychological abuse? Or why call it this? So let's dive into this week. Let's dive into this topic. I would love to take your questions. If you're new here, I'm Dr. Carrie McAvoy. I am a licensed mental health clinician with over 20 years of counseling experience. I have a podcast, a YouTube channel, and I love to talk about all these types of topics, especially controversial ones. I think this is a great one. I appreciate those of you who've come in and said, I think it's unfair that you're labeling everybody with MPD as abusive. That's mean. And it can't end those with MPD possibly be non-abusive. So let's really look closely at this. And I think we have to first start with the DSM-5. And for those of you who want to respond to me or want to ask me a question, please put your thumbs up, like a thumb up emoji in the comments so I know that you're addressing this with me. But I'm going to first just kind of unpack the DSM-5, and then we can start to dialogue about why is those more likely to be abusive? Is that a fair assumption? And then we can also then talk about the label of narcissistic abuse versus emotional or psychological abuse. I think that's a secondary question, but I want to first really look closely at the DSM-5 and whether or not it's fair to say that all narcissists are abusive. So let's pull up the DSM-5, and I actually happen to have the 9 criteria right in front of me. This is out of the DSM-5. So this is the official list that if you're a mental health provider in the United States or actually in the world, and you're licensed to diagnose. So who is that, by the way? Who's licensed to diagnose? That would be psychiatrists, all physicians. Also, although most physicians don't diagnose because they just treat whatever their specialty is. But so usually it's a psychiatrist or it's a psychologist. I'm not for sure licensed social workers are licensed to diagnose or not. I think that they are. I think some are anyway. But I know for sure psychologists and psychiatrists are licensed to diagnose. I'm licensed to diagnose. So I actually have met people and I've given them the NPD diagnosis. So this is the criteria I use when I evaluate someone for the fit, whether or not they have NPD. First one is they have a grandiose sense of self-importance. They like to exaggerate their achievements and be recognized as superior without actually completing the achievement. So they may not actually do what they have said that they've done, but they like to say that they have, and they like to make sure that everyone knows that they have. So let's think about that. The exaggeration of achievement, is that in itself abusive? Well, it's implying that there may be a level of deception involved in the exaggeration. Maybe not. I've known people who like to, for example, let's take the parent who can't stop telling everybody what their child just did to school. The narcissistic parent, the narcissistic mother or father. They may not be, if they're exaggerating, that means they may say they're the top of their class and they meant they're top of their math class, not the top of all their class. But they may not be specific about that. Yeah, that's actually a form of exaggeration, and it's also a mild form of deception. It's misleading, certainly misleading. Is that abusive to others to go around to all your friends, say, hey, my child is the top of their class and they got this amazing score and they're doing fantastic? Is that abusive? It certainly is not collegial, collaborative, wouldn't be easy necessarily to be able to have a relationship with that person. That would kind of be off-putting. And it could be considered invalidation or minimization. It might be that if you're the friend, you might feel diminished by it. So I would say that's potentially a little abusive. What do you think? Do you think that's a little possibly abusive? Now, granted, let's even stop for a second and define abuse. According to the National Hotline of Domestic Violence in the United States, abuse is any time there is a pattern of behavior that is used to dominate and control another person. That's the official diagnosis or official definition. Let me say it again. According to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, anytime somebody has a pattern of behavior that dominates and controls another person, that's considered abuse. So when we exaggerate somebody's performance or a child's performance or our performance, is that an effort to dominate or control another person? Certainly it is to elevate yourself. Absolutely. So is elevating yourself a form of domination? Well, I usually think of domination in the sense of I want to better you. I want to control you. I need my agenda to go forward the way that I want it. That's usually how I would define domination. So, but it could also be that I need to come out on top in the conversation. That may be part of it. So maybe that in a way that is a form of domination, that I need to be the best in the conversation. I need to show you up. So yeah, it is kind of fitting into that criteria, I think. Somebody just asked me, what is MPD? MPD is a cluster B personality disorder. We shorten it. It stands for narcissistic personality disorder. That's what it stands for. All right, so we've already said a grandiose sense of self-importance to where we sort of exaggerate ourselves in order to be superior is not a very kind thing and it's right on the edge of abuse. All right, number 2, they're preoccupied with fantasies of success, power, brilliance, beauty, or a perfect love, something perfect. They have this, they create this mindset of what they think life ought to be or who they think they are, and they are preoccupied with that, the fulfillment of that. Now, that in itself is not interpersonal. That's something that we do on our own in our own head. But the problem is, how does that affect us interpersonally? If we're preoccupied with our specialness or some extraordinariness about us, our brilliance in some way, how do we then work that out relationally with other people? Well, if we're preoccupied with the fantasy of that, then that may mean that we don't engage with other people. It may be that we're doing some comparison of our life against others' lives. We may then feel easily frustrated. It may mean that we're irritable. So it could interpersonally show up. But that in itself, I would say, it doesn't make you an easy person to be around, but I wouldn't necessarily say that's abusive. Now, remember, of the 9 criteria, you need to have 5. So let's say that's one of them 5 that this person has, which we already said, probably not very abusive. Doesn't make them easy, but I wouldn't say they're abusive. Let's say we ignore the grandiose sense of self-importance. Maybe they don't do that. They're just preoccupied with fantasies. So that would be one. They have one match. All right, number 3. They believe they're special, and they should only associate with other special people and special institutions. Okay, so they're special, and now they're evaluating, what that's basically saying, they're evaluating the whole landscape of the world, and they're seeing people as special and not special, and they want to make sure that they're associated with the special people. And someone just asked, what are these 9 criteria? We're talking about narcissistic personality disorder. I wish Instagram allowed me to put a title. That would be really, really helpful for those who are just coming in, because I know it's kind of weird. It's like, what is she talking about? I'm talking about, are those who are narcissistic or have MPD, are they necessarily abusive just because they've been diagnosed with MPD? That's what we're talking about today. So we're taking all 9 criteria. You have to match 5 in order to be diagnosed clinically. We already said number 1 is a little abusive. Number 2, not really. Not really. Doesn't make it easy, but not really. Number 3, this is where we're at now. Number 3, you have to be special. And you want to associate with special people and special institutions. Okay, well, that means now you're judgmental because you can't think of yourself as, in order to be perceived something as special, you have to judge it. And judgmental people certainly would be critical. They're going to be critical. And they're also going to be, so they would express their criticalness of others. Like, that's not good enough. Or this needs to be better. Or I don't do that. Or, so you're going to see this hypercriticalness. And you're also going to see exclusions. They're going to be exclusionary. They're going to avoid certain things. So they're going to say, in fact, I was just watching, there's a show on, it's a Hulu original, and it's on FX, and it's called something about Fleischman. It's about this liver doctor who gets unexpectedly divorced from a really hot wife who plays by Claire Danes. So, and the guy who plays him is the guy who played the main character in Facebook or Social or whatever that Facebook one was about. So you get the picture. He's kind of a dorky, goofy looking guy, and he suddenly finds himself divorced with kind of like middle school kids. And his wife was a woman who could only belong to the right clubs and had to know the right friends. And he kind of complains about how awful that is, how kind of confining that is. And it made him feel really bad when they were bragging, when the group of friends were standing there bragging about how they made their money. Yes, that was Mark Zuckerberg. It's not the Social. It's the guy who played Mark Zuckerberg in the movie. That's the main guy in this show. And it's something like, Where Are You, Fleischman? Or What's Going On With You, Fleischman? Or something like that. That's the name of it's FX on Hulu. And he's obviously married to a wife who has some narcissistic traits. I wouldn't say she's narcissistic, but certainly some narcissistic traits. And you see how he's struggling with being devalued because they all needed to be special and they evaluated him as not special. So I would say number 3, again, is one of those things that, yes, Fleischman's in trouble, is in trouble. That's the name of the show. Fleischman's in trouble. Great. Thank you so much for that. Great show. I'm finding it, by the way, it's very explicit, so please be aware of that. But it's a fascinating show, kind of a look at all of this. So I would say criteria number 3 for the narcissistic personality disorder is one that you could be abusive on, but not necessarily always. But it certainly would make you a very unpleasant person, and the fact that you think you're special. So we said number 1 is, number 2 is not, number 3 is a maybe, it's on the fence. Okay, what's criteria number 4? Requires, notice it says requires excessive admiration. Requires it. By the way, I want to say to those of you who've been in a relationship with a covert narcissist, it doesn't necessarily mean admiration. It really should have said requires excessive attention. It may be they require saving, or they want your sympathy, or they require being noticed. It doesn't have to be admiration in the formal sense of admiration. It needs to be, they're talking about supply. They require excessive supply. Something. Maybe it's a lifestyle. Maybe it's something. Number 1 is a grandiose sense of importance. Number 2 is they're preoccupied with fantasies of success, power, brilliance, beauty, or something. Number 3 is they think they're special. Number 4 is they require excessive admiration, and that's the one we're on. I would say the requirement of it, let's go back to the National Domestic Violence Hotline definition of abuse. A habitual habit of domination and control. Okay? To require is to control, right? If you want, you need it, you insist on it, you're going to seek it, you expect it. I would say it's controlling, right? Anytime you come into a relationship and say, you must give me this, I expect it from you, whether you want to, whether you're in your space to, that's control. So I would say number 4 is, yes, that's abusive. Regardless of how it shows up, it would be abusive. Nanette, I have no idea what LB stands for. And I don't know why you keep saying that either. I'm not for sure what it matters. So I really don't know what you're talking about. I wish I had mods on Instagram. Usually it's pretty tame over here on Instagram, but today, anyway. So number 1 is maybe abusive. Number 2, maybe not. Number 3 is we're on the fence on it. Number 4, I would say yes. If you're going to require supply, that's abusive. Okay, so let's take narcissistic personality disorders when it comes to criteria on the DSM-5 to number 5. Number 5 is you have an sense of entitlement with unreasonable expectations of favorable treatment and compliance to your expectations. Whoa, okay. I don't know how you can get around that one and not say it's abusive. Let me read it again. Has a sense of entitlement, such as you have unreasonable expectations of favorable treatment or compliance with his or her expectations. That means you expect, okay, let's put it back out into, I want this very, no gender specific. This happens for both men and women. And if you guys know me, you know I've met both female and male narcissists. So it's not an attack on men, it's not an attack on women. It's just that we're looking at the whole category. For those of us how many of us have ever had a parent who expects us to do certain things or to get, I remember this happened to me. I brought home a report card. It had mostly A's. By the way, I was pretty much, in my class of 333 students, I ranked 8th. And the top 3 people were all male, and they all had a perfect GPO of 4.0. So the first 3 slots was 4 people, and then there was the valedictorians were 4 people, 4 of them, and the salutatorian was 1 person. So number 1 and 2, I was, out of all the people, 8th. I actually ranked 5th in my class. I had the 5th highest GPA in my class. I bring home my report card to my parents, my dad, hand it to him. He looks over all the grades and says, "What's this B+? What's this B+?" That was abusive. He minimized my performance and focused on the one slight ding from a perfect 4.0 and wanted to know what my problem was, and I needed to get it together. So that I would consider is abusive. Now, Louise just brought in a really great question. Maybe she's talking to somebody else. Isn't there healthy narcissism? So let's table that for a second, because I want to come back to what's healthy narcissism. By the way, we are talking about right now the DSM-5 category. So we're automatically talking about the group of people who are having problems. They've come in because something's going wrong. And like their life's not going well. They're having troubled relationships. Maybe they're really anxious. Maybe they're losing a job. Maybe they're in trouble with the law. Something's going wrong, and they've been kind of pushed into therapy. Because usually, by the way, MPP, those with narcissistic personality disorder, usually doesn't spontaneously seek therapy. I know, because I've treated for 20 years. I had a private practice. They just don't really come in for themselves. They usually came in, I did see them, but they usually came in because they were being threatened with a loss they weren't ready to lose. Like they're about ready to lose a job, or their partner who they've not gotten ready to discard is discarding them, and they're in a crisis, and they want me to help to get this person back. So usually something bad was happening in their life, and that brought them in. Because here's the other thing, I'm just going to add this for a second. I know we say, oh, but it's rare. No. You need to understand how diagnoses work. We only count the diagnosis that occurs by a licensed clinician, which means they have to come in for private therapy, they have to go through insurance, they have to be be hospitalized, and they have to get it. And I want to give you a big dirty secret, guys. Clinicians don't diagnose MPD. We avoid it. We see it all the time, but we do not put it down on the form. We don't diagnose. And the reason is because that diagnosis is going to stay with you for the rest of your life, and we know that. And we don't want you to be stigmatized, so we don't put it down. And we say the primary problem, and plus insurance doesn't pay for diagnoses like this. It pays for like problems like depression and anxiety and bipolar disorder. It doesn't pay for personality disorders. That's a relationship issue. It's a personality issue. It's not like an acute problem. So we're not diagnosing. They don't come in because they want to. They rarely come in. So that's why the numbers are only 1% to 2%. That's why. It'd be like saying, say that there's some problem that's happening out here in the world and nobody ever gets help for it. So they say, because nobody ever gets help for it, then it doesn't exist. Really? No, it exists. We're just it's not going through the channels in which it gets counted. That's all. It's not being counted. It'd be like having a whole county in a state. You're setting up how you're going to do voting and you miss this certain county. You just don't count the people in it. It doesn't mean they don't exist. You just didn't count them. So same thing when it happens with narcissistic personality disorders, is that they're not getting counted. So the numbers are terribly underreported and very deflated. That number you see is very deflated. Okay, so we already said number 1 of the DSM-5 criteria is potentially abusive. Number 2 probably doesn't have to be. Number 3 is on the fence. Number 4, which requires excessive admiration, yes, that's abusive. Okay, number 5 has a sense of entitlement with unreasonable expectations of compliance. Yes, that's abusive. Now we're at number 6. Is exploitive and takes advantage of others in order to achieve their means. Wow. I don't know how that can't be clear. Exploitive and takes advantage, which is really actually takes advantage is another form. They're exploiting. So that means they're manipulating and they're exploiting. However they do it. It could be deception, it could be gaslighting, it could be, just forcing the situation, making it intense, threatening, could be you do it my way or I leave. I don't know, could be I know a lot of us who have financial abuse, could be they cut off people and just say you have no access to XYZ. Could be they criticize whoever you're talking about, so you stop talking about it. They just make it like unpleasant, emotionally unpleasant. Number 6 is clearly abusive. Clearly. So I already 4, 5, and 6 are clearly abusive, and so is 1. That's only out of 9. That's out of 9, and we're already said out of 9, and you have to have 5, 4 are clearly abusive. Woo, okay. If we find one more in 7, 8, and 9, I don't know how you can say that anyone with MPD then is not abusive. If you get the ones that aren't so far, right now, the majority of them are. All right, so it's not looking so good is my point. It's not looking so good. Number 7, lacks empathy and is unwilling to identify with the needs of others. Have you guys ever been around somebody who struggles with empathy? Would you know what that's like? I have. It's rough. That means when you're struggling or suffering or have a bad day, they don't show up for you. They probably may even put you down for it, or tell you how you're not as good or strong as they are. Now, maybe not, but maybe they just walk away. So does a failure of giving support to somebody who needs support, is that abusive? That's the bigger question. Let me say it again. Is the failure to show up for someone who needs support, is the failure to show up for someone who needs support, is that abusive? A lot of times, it is. It's minimization, and it's treating the other one as is invisible. They're not present for that person. So yeah, okay. Oh, well, we just went over, that's 5 out of 9 that we said you only need five criteria, and I haven't hit the last 2. We just identified that they tipped into the abusive category. But let's go ahead and finish out all 9 just to finish this. Number 8, they're envious of others or believe that others are envious of them. This is an interesting one. Did you know the root of resentment is envy, not anger? That's the root of envy. So is resentment. What are bitter and resentful people? That means they're judgmental. That means they're like vocally running things down. It means that they don't see your achievements and they think it's unfair that you have it. That means that they are competing with you, whatever. We're talking with loved ones, that they're competing with you. I'll tell you, when I've experienced being around envious people, they're really unpleasant, really unpleasant. They're just negative and not supportive, and they can't like celebrate my achievements. So again, we're saying forms of minimization, forms of invalidation. I would say, again, this is probably abusive. maybe once in a while it's just unpleasant, but I think it tips a lot into being abusive. Yeah. Oops. So now we've got 6 out of 9 that we say now you cannot not have be considered abusive with MPD. We've clearly said this is over the line. But let's look at number 9. Shows arrogant, haughty behaviors and attitudes. I think that you can be that one and not be abusive, but you already have triggered too many. So whatever combination you set up you pick out of the DSM-5 9 criteria, you've triggered 5. And one of those 5 is going to be abusive. So let's come back to the original question. The original question I started with today, and for those of you who are joining me, I'm Dr. Carrie Kerr McAvoy, a licensed mental health clinician who is licensed to diagnose MPD, and I have diagnosed MPD. We're saying you can't qualify for the DSM-5 criteria for MPD and not be abusive. It's impossible. We just said that. We sat there and we listed all 9, and if you missed it, this will be replayed on YouTube next week. We just listed all 9, and it's impossible to get the diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder and also be not abusive. Okay, so what's going on here? Why is there this pushback? Why this focus? Well, here's some observations from mine. And then when I get done with that, I will then jump in. Why are we calling it narcissistic abuse? And is it only narcissistic abuse because narcissists are doing it? We'll jump into that next, okay? Why is this pushback? Well, part of it is, if you remember all 9 criteria, I don't know if you caught of it, but one is they want to be seen as special, and they also lack empathy. Just those 2 things alone. So for them to say, hey, I have it, that means there's something. It's like I belong to a club, there's a specialness, but they want this to be a good club, not a bad club. And remember, they have this grandiose sense of self-importance. So they wouldn't see what they're doing as hurtful. They would see that as their right. You're saying they don't have a right to be themselves. So that's, you can see how these criteria would work towards someone saying, it's just mean for you to call us awful people. We're not awful people. We're good people. But if you have this, if you really were diagnosed, and if you do really truly fit the criteria, I don't know how anyone can live around you and not be affected by this painfulness, because this is a very unpleasant list. In fact, it's the whole cluster B in the DSM-5 is labeled antagonistic. Just even think about that. That meant a group of researchers spent years. By the way, these DSM-5 takes, or each DSM, and there's 5 editions now, takes at least 10 plus years of critical thought and research, considering all the advances before they put a new one out. I think it's been nearly 15 years since this last one came out, just to give you a perspective of time. And I think that was, the DSM-3 came out in 1980, and we're now just on 5. So DSM-4 and DSM-5 in a span of 43 years, right? Did I add that right? Yeah, I added that up right. Yeah, 43 years, we've only had 2 new editions. That's how much time is spent sitting on these big questions and making sure we ethically approach this, make sure that it's a fair kind of assumptions being made. So, yeah, that's pretty serious. If you meet the criteria, I don't know how you could possibly be a pleasant person to live around. And like I said, they call them antagonistic, which means they're the opposite of agreeable. That means it's conflict riddled. The whole relationship with this person is going to be conflict riddled. All right, so we've established that no, we're not unfairly demonizing narcissists by saying they are probably abusive, because if they really have MPD, they're probably abusive. Somebody said, but isn't there healthy narcissism? Well, some people would say we shouldn't call it narcissism. We should just save narcissism for pathological conditions. And yes, we're all on a spectrum. None of us get out of it with a healthy self-esteem. There are going to be some places, maybe one of these, maybe you and I all trigger at least one. No doubt. I want to be special. Yeah, sometimes I struggle feeling a little superior at times. Yeah, not a lot, but a little, more than I'm comfortable with. So we're all on a scale. We all have fragile egos that doesn't like shame, and we're going to do a few things defensively. True. So I see it as a continuum from near zero to all the way to 100%. And I don't think there's anybody that really hits 100. I hope not. I wouldn't want to meet them. But I also don't think anybody of us is zero either. I don't. So, but what is healthy narcissism? Well, that's actually good self-esteem. You need to have been known that you are loved and that you have a trustworthy environment, stable parenting, stable enough parenting for you to know that you can believe in yourself, that you can take chances, that failures are survivable. Those are all the things that we need to learn in order for us to grow and become healthy people. It's when those things don't happen for whatever reasons, either neurological deficits or extreme chronic parental neglect or all sorts of stuff can cause problems with that. All right, so yes, there is healthy narcissism. I think it maybe would be better referred to as good self-esteem. I think that's a way easier way to reference it versus calling it narcissism and then saying there's good type and bad type. I think that just gets way too confusing. But let's jump into the next question, and then I'll start taking your questions. The next one is, why are we calling some abuse narcissistic abuse? Why don't we just say it's abuse? There is an excellent definition of narcissistic abuse put out by Kristen Milstead. I think it was a few years ago, maybe 5-8 years ago. I think it is the best definition. I think it's one that we in a community need to agree to. I think it's a clear way to kind of differentiate this from emotional abuse, psychological abuse. And this is how she says it's different. Let me go back again and remind you of the definition according to the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Says abuse is a habitual pattern of one person controlling and dominating another. That's very clear cut. In other words, it just means, let's give an example. So let's say I'm going to just pick on women today, just to kind of give men a break. Let's say you have a real tough job. Let's say that maybe you work at the hospital and you have 12-hour shifts and you've come home and you're just exhausted. You're exhausted. You get into the door and your kids have learned, your partner has learned that they need to watch how you're doing, because if they approach you in the wrong way after you've had a bad day, you're going to bark, you're going to attack. Maybe you even get explosive. You do something that's really scary. So that you walk through the door and everyone sort of collectively holds their breath. Okay, how's mom today? How is it going to go well or not go well? This is a big, huge collective breath. That's stage one in a typical abuse cycle. Is a tension, a growing tension. All right, say something happens. Say they sit down for supper and one of the kids spills milk on the floor. Again, there's no deception going on. There's no love bombing. This is just a normal cycle of abuse. In a normal cycle, the next stage is they explode. Boom! Mom loses it. Starts screaming at the kid. Maybe starts screaming at her partner. It's a disaster. It's a whole meltdown. Awful. Just awful. That's stage 2. Stage 3. They come back when it's all said and done, and she says, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said those things. I don't mean it. You know how I am after a rough day." And then she tries "Can I take you out tonight for ice cream?" Or "Let's go sit and watch our favorite show together." She does something to kind of repair the relationship. And that's a normal abuse cycle of abuse. It can happen with sex. It can happen with emotions, like what I just gave you. It could be violent, could be assaultive, all sorts of forms. That's the typical cycle. There's necessarily, maybe some gaslighting might happen there. They might say, "Why do you always have to do this? You're so clumsy." You could gaslight there. But there isn't usually any love bombing or deception going on. Not like that. Okay, so let's talk about narcissistic abuse. According to Dr. Milstead, she wrote this it's an article in Psych Central. And if you kind of, someone suggested to me, and I think it's a fantastic idea, I'm going to create a reference list and start adding all these references for you so that you know where to find these resources, because I really like everything to be based in research. It, to me, needs to be not just it just can't be a popular idea. I mean, it can't be based on my experience or your experience. It needs to be needs to be something that we collectively agree to. It could be theoretical, but even better if it's research. Okay, so according to Dr. Milstead, who is a narcissistic abuse survivor herself, she has a fantastic book called Why Can't I Just Leave? A Guide to Waking Up and Walking Out of Pathological Love Relationships. I love it. I also have a webinar, so if you want to hear speak, you can purchase a replay of the webinar. Amazing, amazing. She says that narcissistic abuse is when there is a false persona developed in order to lure someone into a relationship in order to exploit that person's assets. Could be to exploit their attention, to get a place to live, to get sex, to get their money, could be whatever. But you create a false persona in order to lure someone into a relationship in order to exploit their assets. That's narcissistic abuse. And there's 3 stages to narcissistic abuse. There is love bombing, devaluation, and discard. That's the 3 cycle. It's different. Did you notice it's different? The abuse is tension, explosion, and then the makeup. With narcissistic abuse, it's the false persona is created, and then there is a breach of it where the mask starts to slip and you start to see the real self, and you realize you're in a relationship with somebody that you don't actually know, and you start to grieve the person you thought you met and fell in love with a realization of you're with somebody in a relationship with somebody very different. And then the discard happens. Doesn't matter who does the discard, whether they discard you or you try to get out, but you realize there's this big breach that happens and you need to escape, or they then just get dumb and toss you out. So yeah, it's different. Now, definitely narcissistic abuse is a subset of abuse because there is a pattern of control and domination. But what all abuse is not a creation of false persona. Not all abuse is a creation of deception and like that kind of exploitation. Yes, there is exploitation and abuse, but there isn't this luring, this bait and switch that happens in narcissistic abuse. So why are we calling it narcissistic abuse? Because if you use that definition, then that means you don't need to be a narcissist to do this. In fact, I bet you a lot of people who are doing it do not qualify for the DSM-5 category of NPD. So why are we calling it that? I have a kind of a fascinating question, a way to hit this question. What else could we call it? Pathological love relationships don't take into account that it happens in families, happens at work, happens at neighborhoods, happens between friends. So it can't be pathological love relationship. I don't know of it can't be relational harm. That doesn't say enough. I mean, all of this relational harm. I don't know a better title. I think, as a clinician, as a psychologist, thinking about the term narcissistically or narcissistic abuse, in other words, we're not saying narcissist abuse, we're saying narcissistic abuse. It's the use of one person for the needs of the primary. That is a narcissistic use of somebody. You're saying, you belong to me. Your assets are mine. I have a right to utilize you in that way. Now, I do think if you're a narcissist, it's very hard not to be guilty of narcissistic abuse. I do think there is a strong correlation, but I don't think it's a perfect correlation. I don't think that every narcissist is guilty of narcissistic abuse. But I do think every narcissist is abusive, but not necessarily of narcissistic abuse, because for those who are just joining me, narcissistic abuse is a deception, a false persona in order to manipulate, exploit another person's assets. So I don't have a better title, but I think that's why I think it is the way that it is and why we title it the way that we do. And I know that was a big, huge, long kind of like we were being very careful and deconstructing a lot there. So I'd love to know what you think. What's your reaction to this? Agree, disagree? Was I too kind? Maybe you have a better suggestion of a different name for this kind of abuse, although good luck with trying to change it across everywhere, because I think we pretty much have adopted it by now. And make sure to put your thumbs up so I talk to you guys about so I know that you're talking to me. So you're the one man, you're asking manipulation of emotions. Yeah, I think that's sort of assumed that exploitation of assets or supply could be certainly manipulation of emotions, definitely. Yeah, the non-tangible assets, Cup of Joe, 88 asked, what are those? That would be sex, a place, it could be admiration. It could be power, influence, access to certain things. Could be that. So there's all sorts, anything that you have the other person wants. That could be considered an intangible asset or non-tangible asset. What's the difference between psychopaths and narcissists? Oh, that's a whole nother big discussion. If you'd like me to, I'd be happy to do this with the DSM-5 criteria for the antisocial personality disorder compared to the narcissistic personality disorder. And we can actually sit and look at them side by side. But I think that's beyond the scope of today because we were already taking 40 minutes doing this. So I will do that another time. But I think that's a great question. What about they are targeting emotional reactions to feed on it? Yeah, absolutely. I do agree. I think that's also a fair that sometimes the asset is just upsetness. They want to create conflict and chaos. Remember, they're envious and they feel superior. So how dare you have a better life or have achievement on this? They then may have a way to tear you to pieces in order for them to feel superior. I can absolutely see that. I think that's a great observation. Do I have any tips on Farm Girl? So good to see you, Farm Girl. I love your stuff. Do I have any tips on euphoric recall? So if I think I understand your question, I think you're asking, what do you do when your memory, see what happens with cognitive dissonance is because of the split, because of the false persona, you create two personas in your mind. There's the persona of the good person you thought you met, and then the persona of the person you start to meet, you're living with. And literally this dual reality creates. This is based on Sandra Brown's research. If you want to see the replay of her webinar, I have a fantastic webinar where she kind of breaks this all down. She wrote the book, Women Who Love Psychopaths. She did this massive study of 600 couples. Really fascinating research. So this dual reality happens. So you have the good memories and you have the bad memories. You know how to handle the good person, the easy person. You learn how to handle the bad person. You hope the relationship's savable. At the same time, you feel like there is no hope and you're feeling very, very discouraged. So your euphoric recall, I think what you're talking about is when you leave, you start to remember the dissonance of the good while you're also trying to hold on to why you left, the reality of what it really actually was. Right there, I think what I do, and I have it happen to me too. What I do is I remind myself of the truth. I'd love to know what you guys think, but this is what I do. I remind myself that the person I met, that I fell in love with, really never existed. But the best way I can deal with that, because I've had a lot of real loss in my life, and my first husband passed away, is I say to myself, that person may not have existed, but for me they did, so they died. That's how I cope with it. I see that as grief. So when I have a euphoric recall, I remind myself that that's part of grieving and say, yes, I missed that. I wish that was true, but it's not true. And that helps me process it. Yeah, so you're a widow too. So you know that process that you go through when you let go of a person that you've had a good relationship with, now they're gone. That's how I categorize it, as that. Like those of you who know, I lost my sister this last year, 6 months ago. And I have a lot of memories come back of really great moments. And I feel the pain of that. And I just say that's grief. But I do the same thing with the ex, the toxic ex. So just recently, in fact, I was thinking about some really great dates that we had and how wonderful it was. And then I say to myself, yeah, but I never knew him. That's not who this person is. The person who he really is, I wouldn't want a relationship with him. And so I just say, yes, I missed that, but it's gone and it's passed away. That's how I kind of do it. Yeah, Maddie, if you're experiencing that duality is called chronic and persistent cognitive dissonance. It's very destructive on our mental health. And I know I've been seeing on TikTok, I don't know if it's been as popular on Instagram, I think it is, that it causes brain damage, real brain damage. It's you can image the damage happening to our brains when we live in this duality. So your mind's not meant to know what's not real. It actually causes all sorts of conflict, internal conflict, and that's why you're feeling paralyzed and foggy, and you're struggling to make a decision. It's your brain's actually suffering real damage. It's going to show shrinkage and swellage in certain spots of the brain. Very fascinating. And I know it's shocking. People are like, "What? My brain's being damaged?" Yeah, it's being damaged. And that's another reason why you need to get out, why you need to begin to find a way to protect yourself, is because it's literally toxic to you. It's affecting your hippocampus and your amygdala. Your hippocampus is shrinking, your amygdala is swelling, and there probably is diffuse neocortex problems. So you're having executive functioning problems. But your memory's becoming spotty and foggy. You're also probably having some emotional dysregulation that's happening that you normally don't. And you're on hyper alert and vigilant, and your body you're having problems with insomnia, your cortisol levels too high, you're probably struggling with food or your appetite in some way. Yeah, it actually shows neurological imaging damage. It's been documented. Fascinating. I mean, it's horrifying. But good news, and I know I always get asked this, is it healed? Can you be healed? Yes, you can heal after you get out. Yes. It takes time. It takes time for the body to calm down, but it does take. Yes, the spine's connected because the amygdala is way back just above the spine. So it's the very deepest part in your brain. It's the oldest part that handles the regulation of your body. So yeah, that's where the brain damage actually is. And that's being caused by chronic and persistent cognitive dissonance. Yeah, underdeveloped prefrontal cortex. Yeah, it's the chronic and persistent confusion created by the false persona of the person that you had. Yeah, I started having speech problems too when I was and I went mute. I would actually literally shut down and just go mute. I couldn't speak for myself, and my heart rate went up. I was struggling with my weight. I was struggling with sleep. It was really awful. It's real. Now, I still struggle with sleep. That part's not fixed, but I'm really working hard to calm my life down and to keep it very low level, low stress, so I can heal. Which reminds me, I'm starting next week, today, Thursday, next week, a guided mind-body reconnection experience to help us heal from a bottom up, from the deepest part of our brains up. And that's going to be live on TikTok. I know not all of you on Instagram have TikTok, but I will do it on Instagram. You just won't get to see the guests. So I'm inviting 5 of you guys no, amygdala is way back in the deep part it's in the center of the brain, very deep, it's connected to the spinal cord because it's part of your fight and flight system. So I'm going to be doing this guided multi-guest experience on TikTok. You can sign up. You have to sign up. I will not take spontaneous requests. You have to sign up because I have a disclaimer. You have to agree to the disclaimer. So you can see the link in my bio if you'd like to be a live guest for it, but the audience will get to participate. You know how you guys watch different lives of people doing things like remove the shell off an egg, or some are doing all sorts of beautiful music, or maybe you watch somebody write or create art or whatever. You'll be allowed to, you're going to watch this and you can participate. So next Thursday, be here at 1:00 Central Standard Time and be ready to be in a calm environment with dim lighting. Make sure you can lean against something that's very, very comfortable. I'm going to put it in a different little bit setting so that it's a little nicer than this office look. I'm also putting together a royalty-free playlist of music, so we have kind of spa-like music, and I will lead you through a guided experience of reconnecting with your body and your mind and your emotions. And there's 9 different exercises so far that are prepared. We will do one each time, so 9 weeks, but there will be a week or 2 off in the process. So if you really want to know what the schedule is, I did post it once, so I don't know where it's at this point. We'll try to post it again. But also, if you sign up, it's in the Calendly. So when you sign up, you'll see which one you're signing up for. The first 2 are already full, so I don't have any room for next week or the week after. But the one in February still has slots, and then you can sign up through February and March. And then I'll start I may add more exercises, or I may start over. We'll kind of see where it goes. And yes, these are going to be recorded. Yes, they're going to be recorded, and they will be put back up on YouTube, which is why I'm being so careful about the royalty-free music, so that I can use it on YouTube. So yes, we'll be recording it in a landscape way so that you can see that. I'm super excited. I'm going to be vulnerable for a second. Some of these feel simple to me, but here's the thing. but they're not actually simple. Because when you're in trauma, the center part of your brain, how we've been talking about this chronic persistent cognitive dissonance, when you're being traumatized, the center part of your brain that has to do with sensing yourself in your body in space goes offline. If you think about it, it makes sense. So let's take it out of like abuse and talk about something non-abuse related. Say that you have a near miss on the highway. That I just went to Dallas this weekend and I almost hit somebody. Her and I were moving into the same lane at the same time, and we happened to look at each other just as we were about ready to occupy that lane together, and we jumped off. Okay, in that moment, my flight or fight system clicked on, and I went into flight. So I jerked away. She jerked away. I jerked away. We both went into flight mode. When you're in that moment, like envision yourself having a near accident on the highway, you aren't thinking about what your feet is doing or how you're feeling. You're not considering where your hands are in space. You just move. Your whole body goes into, I got to get out of here. This is bad. So literally all the parts of you that have to do with sensing yourself and being checked in with yourself goes offline. And it's good. It's good that it does that because we need to react, not sit and think, how do I feel about moving out of this lane? Is this you don't want to be doing that. But when you live in an abusive relationship for a long time, you chronically go offline. You stop being in touch with yourself. You no longer know how you feel. You're always in survival mode, trying to figure out if you need to flee, if you need to fawn, if you need to fight, if you need to freeze. You're constantly doing that. So you can't focus on who you are and where you're at. So these exercises, starting next week, are designed to help us get back in touch with our bodies. And it's going to start progressive. So the first one is just in touch with your body. Then I'm going to start helping you have a sense of your body in space. Then we're going to talk about emotions, getting in touch with emotions. And then we'll talk about how to soothe yourself. So we're going to incrementally work up to the more complicated stuff. So I'm super excited. I hope you guys join me next Thursday at 1 o'clock Central Standard Time. Other questions. I got about 5 more minutes before I have to wrap up today, but it's been wonderful hanging out with you. I did hear that those of you who were here at the start and caught the beginning, we did the DSM-5 criteria for narcissistic personality disorder and challenged whether or not you could have that diagnosis and not be abusive. So if you missed it, watch this on YouTube next week. You'll get to see this again. But I did see you guys would love me to take antisocial personality disorder and compare it to narcissistic personality disorder. Because here's the thing. I know a lot of you said, how in the world, why would you take Dr. Ramani on? Dr. Ramani says that she thinks antisocial personality disorder is an extreme version of narcissistic personality disorder. I disagree. I think they're separate. Because really what Dr. Ramani is doing is she's taking on the DSM-5 committee and saying they missed it, that they should have just made antisocial personality disorder an extension of MPD. Why? If it is an extension of MPD, then why are they not together? So actually, she's the one kind of out of mainstream on that, so I don't agree with her. I do think that they're two separate things. I've met both types. I've met those who are antisocial personality disorder who are not narcissistic. I do know that group. I've met them. My grandmother was one. She was not narcissistic. She did not consider herself special. She wasn't looking for admiration. Are you kidding me? No, she didn't want admiration. So yes, I've known people who fit the antisocial personality disorder pretty well. Yes, somebody says, well, it's flawed. Yeah, okay, you can say that about everything. Nobody's going to always agree with everything. And as I shared, the 1980 was the DSM-3. We're now 2023 and we have the DSM-5. They've taken 43 years to update that carefully because of all the critical thought and research. Now, is there political motivation and sometimes propaganda behind it? Oh, absolutely. You're never going to get a human institution who doesn't have some ulterior motive. So it's not a perfect system, but it's a good system. I've diagnosed for people off of it for a very, very long time, and it's a really good system. Oh, yeah, Brittany, I missed your questions. Is a domestic abuse system, is it domestic violence abuse cycle also? No, the cycles are different. The abuse cycle is tension, explosion, and honeymoon, and the narcissistic abuse cycle is love bombing, devaluing some form of withholding or discard, then the love or breadcrumbing again. And they don't necessarily need to leave the relationship, but they'll circle through that cycle. So that's that question. What other questions? Yeah, you start studying. I did too. I started studying as well. Okay, so I did you feel like I answered the question for you, Brittany? Yeah, and by the way, I have had subscribers. I do have a subscribers on both Instagram and TikTok. And what happens if you become a subscriber? You get access to me, better access to me. You also are immediately invited to an online group with Facebook and Discord. So for $5 a month, you're able to then be in a private group that's off, that we're just those of us who are in, and you can able to talk to other people, get to know them. We do once a month video chats, and the next video chat's going to be here in a couple weeks, where we just sort of hang out. It's going to be a Thursday evening at 6 p.m. So if you'd like greater support, it also gives you discounts to all my products, big discounts. So if you'd like all of that, please consider becoming a subscriber on either TikTok or Instagram. All right, guys, this was amazing. I know it was jam-packed of lots of information. I will be having this as a replay, so if you missed today or missed any of it and you want to see it in its entirety, you'll be over on YouTube channel, and it's going to be talked, again, for those who didn't catch it earlier, we talked about, are we demonizing narcissists by saying that they're abusive? And we actually came up with a very interesting question by looking at the kind of breaking it all down. So if you missed it, please make sure you come back on YouTube and watch the replay next week. All right, you guys are the best. I love you all so much, and I'll see you next week on Tuesday. Bye-bye.